bevo.com.
David, for chief executives that are watching or wannabe chief execs that are watching, do you have any specific advice for how you can help a C-level suite executive be better at their job with the amount of priorities and multitasking, multifunctional approach that they need to take in their position?
Interestingly, a lot of chief executives intuit a lot of these best practices and have them embedded already. The best chief executives I know are to some degree made of Teflon. Nothing sticks. It comes in, they've quickly learned to make good decisions about what needs to happen and then how to offload the results of that thinking to trusted people and systems, which is basically a core GTD kind of best practice. So a lot of them got there because they intuited that best practice. A lot of them are highly frustrated because people around them don't. And so how do they then trust that the things that they offload are being handled and managed? That those people are looking at the right things they need to look at the right time. And each one of us, some chief executives say, look, I've made it, I don't need to go any further. And some chief executives who are into lifelong learning are constantly looking for how can I get an edge? How am I able to do this more? So all the chief executives that I've coached who've been interested in me coming in to work with them all have significant improvement opportunities, but they're little fine tunes. But oftentimes those little fine tunes can make a huge difference. The ability to be able to get a little bit more freedom in their mind, to have a little bit more creative time to be thinking strategically, or the ability also to be able to then multitask. Oftentimes when somebody has especially graduated into the CEO level, as opposed to being a little more mono-focused on an area of responsibility, now they have to see across a much broader swath of things and to be able to keep their finger and pulse on a much broader horizon around there. And sometimes their systems need to be upgraded to be able to manage that new level. Obviously, much of what happens and how their actions move forward are in interactions with other people. So how do they manage the agenda? How do they capture those agendas and make sure they get it on the plate so the next time they talk to their EVP of marketing or the next time they talk to the corporate counsel, what are all the things that I need to make sure that I go over with them? So even no matter how well they've delegated, and of course many of them have delegated extremely well, they still got their own 10 acres that they have to manage, that things are generated from within that, things come over that transom and land within that. They still have to then understand and rigorously apply that executive thinking process. What is it? What's the next step on this? What needs to happen to move this forward? Where does this go? And oftentimes understanding, being able to step back and see that view is a very, very critical thing to do, to build in that weekly review for a CEO, where they're backing off and thinking at a different level, because oftentimes that's where they'll make their biggest mistakes, is they lose perspective on what they need to keep taking into consideration as they're making those kinds of decisions. So anything that can support being able to handle the mundane things that they still are going to have to handle, and many times they'd rather handle better. Interestingly, some CEOs I've coached, once I show them, like, you're going to find it very useful to have an at-hand paper-based filing system that's very easy to use, so they can keep confidential stuff or creative things that they want to keep right at hand and know how to manage that kind of paper. Interesting, because many times CEOs, especially if they're moving up to the next level, where they're thinking about moving on to the next level of game, even perhaps semi-retiring and then being on 3 different boards and getting into some of the more creative projects and doing more things for NGOs or whatever they're thinking about doing, they then need to upgrade sometimes their own personal systems to manage that, because they don't have necessarily a lot of staff that are going to help them manage that. So it's very different, as you can tell, with each person. It's going to be almost as unique. That's the nice thing about GTD, is it wraps itself around the individual very uniquely. So it doesn't restrain or constrain you. You're really saying, where are you going and what are the little efficiencies you can build into your systematic thinking process, as well as your system, out here. How are you working with the computer, and how are you keeping track of projects and the bigger bullets, and how are you being reminded of what you need to when? And all that just can oftentimes be improved and shorn up, but it's really a fine-tuning.
David, you've coached a lot of CEOs personally on productivity and focusing mechanisms. So is there a reoccurring pattern or error or weakness area in across the CEOs that you've actually worked with that maybe you can give us now just one piece of advice that may answer a reoccurring issue amongst that specific function?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I wish I had a really good and simple answer. It's so unique. Each person is so unique about that. I mean, ultimately, I fall back on the basic keys, about GTD to begin with, which is keeping, as the psychologists call it, distributed cognition. Keep it out of your head. And the ability, I think, to have creative time for yourself. I think that's the biggest thing, not just CEOs, but most senior executives I'm dealing with, to be able to get the bandwidth to think at a different level and to be able to build that in so that they have an and so, they build in off sites and they build in, peer group, off sites where they can hang and chat with people and the breakfast clubs and those kinds of things. Those are extremely valuable. But it's nice to be able to build that in as a systematic process even for yourself. And anything that you can do to be able to get more and better time to be thinking at a different level. And also, probably the biggest issue is how to be able to then transfer that as you train and lead other people. In other words, how do I also help them and assist them in being able to step up to the plate with those kind of executive skills? So, those are all fairly common things that cut across the board.
Bevo